Imagine you spend 8 years telling everyone that your neighbor's fence agreement is the worst deal in the history of deals. You tear it up. You start a war. You spend 100 days bombing things. You watch gas hit $4.24 a gallon. Your allies refuse to send warships. Your markets panic. And then, at the end of it, you sign a new fence agreement that looks, remarkably, almost comically, like the one you tore up. Except this time, you also owe the neighbor a reconstruction program that some drafts put at $300 billion. And you didn't tell Israel. Now. I mention this not because I have strong feelings about fences, but because this is, with only mild exaggeration, what just happened between the United States and Iran, and the people who are calling it a victory have not read the numbers. Let's start with something that almost never gets said plainly on this topic, which is that on the morning of February 28, 2026, the day before Donald Trump launched a war against Iran, the Omani foreign minister went on American television and said, publicly, that Iran had already agreed to major concessions, irreversibly downgrade their enriched uranium, give up their stockpile. The deal was, in the Omani's words, essentially done. The next morning, bombs started falling. Now, you can believe the Omani foreign minister was lying, or you can believe Donald Trump looked at a finished deal and chose a war instead. One of those things requires you to discount a sitting foreign minister on live television. The other one requires you to accept that 100 days of economic damage, soaring oil prices, and a new supreme leader in Tehran was the chosen alternative to signing paperwork. You decide. Because here is what 100 days of chosen war actually produce for Americans. On February 27, 2026, the day before the war, a barrel of West Texas crude cost $67. By May, it had crossed $102. Gasoline nationally hit $4.24 a gallon. That is $1 higher than where it was a year before, when Trump was proudly telling Congress it was below $2.30 in most states. Diesel hit nearly $5 a gallon. Jet fuel surged 56%. Trucking companies started adding fuel surcharges. And when ABC News asked Trump what he thought about Americans paying more at the pump, he described it as a little glitch. A little glitch. This from the man who campaigned on gas below $2. He did not explain which part of the glitch was the $100 oil, or which part was the American families who couldn't afford the summer road trip they'd been planning since January. The Strait of Hormuz, for those who need the geography refreshed, is a strip of water about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Through it passes roughly 20% of the world's oil supply. When Iran closed it, which it did at the start of the war, and then used as leverage for everything that followed, the global economy did not politely wait. Oil spiked above $116 a barrel at one point. Goldman Sachs said the prices could last through 2027. South Korean and Japanese petrochemical producers started cutting production. Restaurants in India ran out of gas canisters, what one CNN analyst called the most usable weapon Iran had ever acquired, more usable than a nuclear bomb, because you can actually deploy it without starting a world war, turned out to be the thing Iran already owned, and that the United States, by starting a war without a plan for it, handed them the occasion to use. Trump, of course, called it a win. He wrote on Truth Social, "Ships of the world, start your engines, let the oil flow," which is the kind of sentence that works as a victory announcement if you don't ask what it costs to get there, and if you don't read the fine print. The deal, a memorandum of understanding that will be formally signed in Geneva, reopens the strait and establishes 60 days of negotiations on the nuclear program and sanctions. Iran gets sanctions relief, frozen assets unfrozen, and the nuclear question, the question that was the stated reason for the war, is deferred to a future conversation that hasn't happened yet. Iran will continue enriching uranium at low levels in the interim. There are no inspectors on the ground, no centrifuges dismantled, no verification mechanism agreed. In 2015, the Obama deal, the one Trump spent his entire first term calling the worst agreement in American history, included 160 pages of technical controls, on-the-ground IAEA inspectors with access to suspect sites within 24 hours, and centrifuges physically removed from service. Trump's 2026 version is a memorandum of understanding mediated by Pakistan, signed without Israel being informed of the terms, and with the nuclear issue kicked 60 days down the road. You have to admire the improvement. And this is where the Israeli reaction becomes not just politically interesting, but genuinely useful as a diagnostic. Because Israel was not a neutral party here. It was supposed to be the whole point. The war was sold, in large part, around Israeli security, around the existential threat from Tehran, around the absolute necessity of eliminating Iran's nuclear capacity before it was too late. The Israelis flew missions. They killed the supreme leader in the opening hours of the conflict. They launched their ground invasion of Lebanon to its deepest point in a quarter century. And then Trump signed a deal, over their head, without them in the room, that leaves Hezbollah as a going concern, leaves Lebanon's status unclear, leaves the nuclear program intact for future negotiation, and is being described by Israeli politicians across the entire spectrum as a catastrophic betrayal. Bezalel Smotrich, who is about as far right as Israeli politics goes, said the agreement is bad for Israel and for the entire free world, and promised that Israel would continue to try to topple the Iranian regime in, and I quote, creative ways. Yair Lapid, who is the leader of the Israeli center-left, the opposition, said that Netanyahu became the father of Israel's greatest strategic failure in history. When Smotrich and Lapid are reading from the same script, you have achieved something genuinely rare in Israeli politics. You have unified a fractured country around a shared sense of humiliation. That is not a diplomatic outcome most people put on their list of goals. And then there is what ordinary Israelis said. Not politicians, not pundits, but people on Telegram, the one platform where political inhibition tends not to survive contact with reality. Quote, God will curse Trump. Quote, the first war in Israel's history that we lost. Quote, Iranians taught America a lesson. These are not the words of people who feel protected. These are the words of a population that watched their government fight a war, lose 118 soldiers in Lebanon alone, watch their northern residents live under constant fire, and then see the country that was supposed to be their unconditional backer sign a deal that, in their reading, makes Iran stronger and leaves Hezbollah in the field. Whether that reading is accurate is almost beside the point. This is the political reality that Netanyahu now has to manage, which brings us to the part of this story that is, underneath everything, fundamentally about American domestic politics. Trump did not sign a deal with Iran because he changed his mind about Iran. He signed it because there are 90 days to the American midterm elections. Because his approval on the cost of living just hit 36% in NBC's polling. That is 36% of registered voters who approved of how he was handling inflation. Because the war he started was making everything more expensive for the people who voted for him. Because Mark Levin was on television calling the deal a betrayal, and Lindsey Graham issued a statement that congratulated Trump while simultaneously positioning J.D. Vance as the architect who could be blamed when things go wrong, which is a very specific kind of political maneuver that only someone already thinking about 2028 would bother constructing. The pressure was not coming from Tehran. The pressure was coming from the gas station down the street, and Trump, who has an extraordinary political instinct for where the pain is, felt it. This is not an insult. This is simply what happened. The question that nobody in Washington seems willing to say out loud, but that every serious analyst is circling, is this. If the deal that just got signed is structurally similar to the terms Iran was offering on February 27th espion before the war, then what exactly did 100 days of bombs, a naval blockade, 53% higher oil prices, $1 a gallon gas hike, a new Iranian supreme leader who may be more hardline than his father, and a diplomatic rupture with Israel actually accomplish? The answer, as far as anyone can tell from the available evidence, is that it accomplished the reopening of a strait that Iran closed because of a war America chose to start. Which is a bit like breaking your neighbor's window, spending 3 months negotiating with them about it, paying for the broken glass, and calling it a victory because the window is now unbroken. Of course, in this version, you also paid $102 a barrel for the privilege while it was happening. There is one more thing worth saying, because it tends to get lost in the noise about missiles and negotiations and telegram posts. Before this war started, Iran's nuclear breakout time, the estimated time it would take them to produce enough material for a weapon, was assessed at about 2 weeks. The U.S. and Israeli strikes on Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan in June 2025 caused, in the assessment of the IAEA, enormous damage. But the Defense Intelligence Agency's leaked assessment said the program was delayed by a few months, not eliminated. And in the interim, Iran discovered something arguably more valuable than a bomb, which is that it has a choke point over 20% of global oil that it can deploy whenever it feels existentially threatened. The war did not remove Iran's leverage. It demonstrated it. That is a different kind of outcome than the one that was promised. The United States went into this war with promises of regime change, nuclear elimination, a decimated Hezbollah, and a Middle East remade on American terms. It came out with a memorandum of understanding, 60 days of future talks, oil slowly coming back down from where it never needed to go, and a best ally in the region that just called it the greatest strategic failure in their history. The official line from Washington will be that the strait is open, the nuclear threat is contained pending negotiation, and that further diplomacy will close the remaining gaps. That may even be true. But if it is, it will be true on approximately the same terms that were available on February 27th, before anyone started anything. That is not nothing. It is just also not what was promised. And the people who filled up their tanks at $4.24 a gallon while it was being sorted out will, I suspect, remember the discrepancy, even if no one in the briefing room mentions it. I am Marcus Fenn. This is Borderlines, analysis from the edge. If this kind of unvarnished look at the actual cost of geopolitical decisions is something you think more people should see, subscribe now. The next one will not be easier to watch, but it will be accurate.